podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome once again to Howe're the podcast as we gather after a frustrating 1-0 defeat to Swansea City at the Stadium of Light, where, I don't know if you listened to the lads on the review pod, but it was so exciting that they started talking about what they thought the most entertaining part of the game was, which was Seagulls desperately trying to grab some food off the pitch while dodging Trey Hume. I think one of the lads was focused on 3 particular Seagulls who were having a scrap and trying to dodge the fullbacks' 2-footed tackles while they were trying to get some sort of iced buns, which means we might avoid talking about the game in detail today, and instead we talk about maybe in the context of the season to come and hopefully get a little bit of kind of historical journalism, as we've been talking to Jeff Brown and Ian Murter recently. So to go through all that, we're very pleased to be joined by none other than Tyne Tees sports presenter Simon O'Rourke. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
Yeah, good to speak to you. How are you keeping?
Yeah, not bad at all. Things are good. The weather's turning round. We're getting into the exciting time of the year football-wise, so everything's pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. We were talking to Nick Barnes a while back, and he just said, since because you mentioned spring and the weather changing, he was saying that he felt during the winter that everything just kind of seemed to, there was this kind of cloud that hung over the club. Everyone just seemed mentally tired. And he feels like in the spring, everyone was coming back out of that. Did you feel that reporting on Sunderland as well?
I can see what he means, but we are speaking less than 24 hours after the home game against Swansea City. So I think in those terms, perhaps it's a subject that we should maybe put to one side, the seasonal affected disorder of it all.
Yes, well, that's it. Well, actually, but before we kind of get into the modern day, because, we've had some fun conversations with the likes of Ian Murter and Jeff Brown recently about kind of reporting on our, top clubs in terms of the Northeast over the years. And, I thought that would be a good place for us to start, especially as soon as the game finished. I thought, how do you talk about that game for half an hour? But yeah, when I was looking into it, Simon, 1996 was when you started at Tyne Tees.
Yeah, never been good enough to get another job since then. Yeah, so that's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah, but surely it's the dream job, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is absolutely fantastic. And any sort of jokes you make aside, I've learned not to make jokes because it is a fantastic job. I've always loved it. It's absolutely brilliant. I've been super lucky to do it, and I hope to do it for a lot longer because it's great.
Yeah, me and Martin were talking with Jeff Brown and, talking about kind of as he started off and saying that me and Martin, it's the reason we do the fanzine and things, because we're basically failed sports journalists. Basically the reason why we're doing this. But yeah, going back to kind of 1996 and, we again talking to Jeff Brown and Murter, this big kind of message started to come across as we were talking to both of them was obviously how much the job's changed. I mean, in terms of how you see things, from those mid-90s, I mean, in terms of reporting on that next story or trying to get that next story, obviously with social media coming into it, how's that evolved? Because everyone's talking about stuff to the world 24/7 now.
Yeah, well, that's it. You've kind of answered your own question. It evolves into a completely different job now because, as you say, you've got the world of social media where basically it's impossible to keep secrets, and any piece of information is almost instantly out in the public forum. And it has kind of changed. It changes the nature of, I suppose, sort of what journalism is and how you go about getting stories and how you go about sort of keeping on top of things as well.
Yeah. I mean, because, as well, looking at regional news, especially, because there's always been, that debate about regional news. But as you said, with the world kind of changing with that advent of social media, there was once upon a time, I suppose, when you started where you were, because you had those contacts inside the club or you knew people or you knew people who knew people, you could kind of break that story. But where do you see that role of regional news now? Do you see that as kind of reinforcing, I don't want to say the truth, but, with that much going on social media, do you see the regional news' role it is kind of reinforcing this is exactly what is happening and to kind of get the rest of the noise out of the way?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit, I see my job a little bit like being a political correspondent. You've got to be on top of what's going on. You've got to be the boots on the ground for your organisation and have relationships with the right people. But also to actually directly follow up your point, you've got to learn not to bark at every car that goes past as well, because that's the world of social media. And you've got to be able to have a mechanism to A, just sort of know, but B, know who to ask and who to check with, that not everything is true, not everything is correct, and things are more nuanced than possibly social media sometimes realizes. And I think in a way the role is now almost disseminating some of that, and not just true and false, but being a trustworthy voice, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, because you've touched on those relationships, is that almost a fun part of it that was part of your role back in the day that is maybe gone out of it a little bit, where once upon a time you can maybe call someone up or grab someone after a game or training, where now you've got to go through official channels? I mean, is that completely changed?
Yeah, 100%. When I first started, you could go to training grounds and really press officers weren't a thing at that time in the 1990s. And you developed your own relationships with players and staff, and you'd just stop them and say, have you got 5 minutes? Can we go and speak? I started on the radio, so you'd have your little recorder and that kind of thing, and you just go around the corner and you'd speak to people. And it's not like that anymore. In fairness, it started changing towards the end of that decade, and by the turn of the century, press officers were in place. I've got no problem with press officers. I've known some good press officers and some bad press officers, but I've got no problem with them actually being there. But yes, it did change. The very nature of it changed, because it used to be almost entirely a relationships business, whereas now it's much more transactional and much more formal and much more you go through the club. And it's just changed. But I think it's part of a wider change in the world. I mean, back in my early days at Tyne Tees, if something needed doing, then my boss, Roger Thames's assistant, would pick up the phone, make 2 phone calls, and it'd be sorted. And now there's 57 forms to fill in and things like that, and risk assessments and health and safety. It's all very important, but it is just an example of how the world has become more bureaucratic and how it's changed.
Yeah, it's just part of the job now. Going back to those relationships, I mean, obviously, you took going back to 96, which is obviously Peter Reid. And, we were talking to, again, the likes of Jeff Brown, but going back to the likes of Laurie McMenemy as well, huge, absolutely huge characters. But, do you think that's changed as well, where, and I know I don't want to use the word professional, because obviously Peter Reid was professional at what he does, absolutely. But that there was a different relationship there, because you can't imagine, you'd struggle to imagine Peter Reid having those same relationships and doing the same things with the press, because I think at the time he might have I think there were stories he took the press out, every now and again, or, especially when he came in, he took them out and got to know them and things like that. I mean, do you think those characters have gone out the game?
Yes, largely. We've entered a different sort of era now. I think football management structures have changed, and that's brought a different type of person into the game. And I'm not really a huge fan of the phrase old school, but it does, when it fits, it fits. And so the old school methods, the Peter Reids, the Steve Bruces, who you could just ring up and have a chat with, and it didn't happen every week, by the way, but the occasional pint of beer with, strong adult beverage. Those characters have largely kind of just currently are not so much in the game, just because of kind of the way structures have moved on, the way clubs want to do their business now. And yeah, it's just, it feels very old fashioned to think of things like that now. And it was fun back in the day, but the world does move on.
Yeah. And was that a two-way thing back then, though, that you wanted the story out of them so you could ring them up, but they also wanted to use you a little bit, which doesn't maybe happen so often now?
Yeah, from time to time. And, one or two of them wouldn't be shy about ringing you up if they didn't like what you were saying as well. And that was all just part of the process. That was part of building relationships as well. And yeah, that very, very rarely happens now.
Yeah. Was it tough when you started off? Because again, Jeff Brown, the first person he got involved in was with Lauren McMenemy, and as a young reporter, were you in a similar position with Peter Reid, where almost you were starting off and you just had to go up to these people, and that because there wasn't the official channels that you went through as a company, you just had to go up to Peter Reid and get to know him.
Yeah, and it was quite nerve-wracking.
It would be.
You're in your early 20s, and so some of like the older generation didn't mind being quite intimidating, and so you had to be kind of, you had to have a thick skin, basically. And if sort of interaction 1 didn't go too well, you had to not bottle interaction 2. You had to go back and do better and earn the respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously the eras we've been talking to people about, more so because it's probably my era, but that kind of late 90s, I suppose after Peter Reid came in, and generally across the northeast in the 90s, you saw massive change. Peter Reid came in and transformed the club, and I remember speaking to John Ficklin a few years ago, and he described when he was really shocked when he came into Sunderland that he from the outside, he thought it was this grand club, and inside, and when he started getting involved, he realised it was ran almost like a social club. It was just almost this, not amateur, but almost this kind of thing where everything was all over the shop. I mean, how was it for you? Because now that you look back to report on that change of Sunderland from the mid-90s to the late 90s, where they transformed from Roker Park, as much as I love the place, it was dropping a bit. We were ran in, like John Flicken said, like a social club. And then suddenly within 5 years, the club just flipped to a 49,000 all-seater stadium, almost getting into European places. I mean, for you to report on that and the end of Roker Park, the start of the Stadium of Light, and people are always going to look back to your reporting on that.
It was phenomenal. It was really exhilarating as well. Everything you've talked about. Also, what I think was crucial is that the first few years at the Stadium of Light were amazing, absolutely amazing. The team was fantastic. The football was brilliant. They won more games than they lost. The players are, club legends. It was a superb time. It really was. Obviously, the stadium move changed everything, and that's kind of really all down to Bob Murray and. Bob may not have been perfect, but is one of the most influential people in the history of Sunderland Football Club. And the whole city owes him a great debt for building the new stadium and moving the club from the past into what was then the present and now the future as well. But it was an exhilarating time. I mean, that's still, to date, my favourite time covering Sunderland, because it was exhilarating is the word I'd use. It was absolutely fantastic. That group of years. Obviously, the last year at Roker Park involved a relegation, so it wasn't great. But the first few years at the Stadium of Light were just my happiest time covering the club, because it was amazing.
Yeah. Was there a particularly kind of favourite story that you broke or that you covered that you look back and go, that was a big one, or I enjoyed doing that one?
Oh, I don't know. There was a couple of transfers which I was sort of on top of. I think now it's such a long time ago. I just remember the big picture things, and I'll never ever forget the playoff final. Now, that obviously that's not a breaking story. Lost on penalties, but it literally, for range of emotions, I don't think I've ever covered a sporting event quite like that. It was astonishing, and the role I was on that day was back in the days when Tyne Tees had a sports team. My role that day was to speak to the fans outside, and people were just shell shocked. But not just the people. I was as well. I had to take 5 minutes and think, I'm not ready to go out yet. I just take a few minutes to sort of let this sink in, what's happened. And people were sort of walking about outside, and it wasn't the sort of anger that you sometimes get after lost finals. And Lord knows, Sunderland and a lot of North East football teams know all about lost finals. But it was different. It was people walking about in a daze, and it's something I'll never forget. But also the memory actually isn't that bad because of what came after it, the 12 months that came after it. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. It's funny because you were talking there. I remember walking out just out of Wembley from the seat, and Walking on Sunshine was being played as I was walking through the leakage from the porta cabins that were the toilets at Wembley at the time, and that's pretty much my lasting memory of Wembley. But yeah, I mean, just kind of in terms of moving on to the modern day, Nick Barnes was saying something interesting about some developments lately, about changes at the club in terms of how the press is allowed to cover, or that they're moving players, almost in front of the camera now in different ways. I mean, have you seen that as well?
Yeah, actually, probably about the most interesting thing that happened at the Swansea game yesterday. Because I've been away doing other things for a couple of home games recently, but yeah, they've taken a decision, which is a really interesting decision, to move the TV people down to a different area. So normally what used to happen was we'd just go and set our cameras up upstairs and we'd film Regis Le Bris' press conference afterwards. And then for the radio, they'd bring a player up. We were not generally invited to film that, but that was fine. Were we particularly to push that point, then I'm sure we would have been allowed to. But now they've moved us down and given us small interview spaces each. And the reason is they want to get the players and the head coach used to the idea of doing anything up to 15, 16, 17 interviews after a game, which if they are promoted to the Premier League would be more the order of the day, because then it's not just Sky Sports and possibly national ITV if they decide they're turning up to do their sort of their inserts for the EFL highlights program and the local guys, but you'll have worldwide people. You'll have the people from beIN Sports there. You'll have so many different people, so many different radio stations, so many different television stations if they go up to the Premier League. And they want to get the players and the head coach more used to that idea of basically going along the line and speaking to this guy, then this guy, then this guy, then this guy.
Yeah. Just out of interest, you mentioned like that they're preparing for that. How, as from a regional news point of view, how does that change your job if we're in the Premier League? Because I imagine in the Championship that, yes, there's a few nationals dotting about, but I imagine actually you're the ones kind of wanting things and trying to get things and trying to get the coverage. But obviously that changes massively in the Premier League.
It does, and it becomes more of a rights holders issue as well. So the truth is that if and when Sunderland go up to the Premier League, I'll get less access to them because ITV and Tyne Tees as part of ITV are not rights holders of the Premier League. And therefore, you'll probably go back to being in front of the press conference and you won't be invited downstairs because you don't have to be, because you're not on the long list of people who are rights holders of the Premier League. It does actually tend to mean less access, certainly to players. But obviously it's a trade-off because you're dancing on the biggest stage, aren't you?
Yeah. And actually, you mentioned rights there, and obviously recently we've seen a few games on ITV from the Championship. I think there's a big Leeds game. I think was it Leeds Sheffield United? I think it was. There was obviously the Sunderland game.
Borough Sunderland was on.
Yeah, Borough Sunderland. I mean, do you actually see the possibility of it swinging back a little bit? Because obviously Sky have ramped it up in terms of their kind of Football League coverage. But I mean, I go back to the days of watching, games on Tyne Tees. You mentioned Roger Thames. I always remember us getting hammered at Ayresome Park all the time with Roger Thames talking about it. It always seemed to be games at Ayresome Park where we got hammered. But you see it almost kind of cycling back round that way.
So yes, but only to an extent. So for a start, regional TV is not the same. So you won't get a Roger Thames type situation again with Tyne Tees doing the live wraparound coverage of Middlesbrough against Sunderland, because regional ITVs are kind of just like satellite organisations now. We don't generally make our own programmes. We kind of did recently, but generally we're sort of satellite, almost smaller news organisations now. We don't actually have a sports team. We have me. But the actual idea of the Football League going back onto terrestrial television from time to time again is an idea I know that people are very keen on, but that is the level at which it will stop, because the Premier League just doesn't need to do that. It doesn't need that sort of relationship because it's so all-encompassing and, one of the biggest organisations in world sport that it just doesn't need to think about that. It just needs to think about its own broadcast partners, its own broadcast deals and all the money.
Yeah, I mean, even at a lower level, maybe it wouldn't happen. You know, you're talking about I was going to say Carlisle's, but they might go this season. And I mean, I suppose Darlington and Hartlepool have. For me, when I used to watch North East kind of coverage, Saturday afternoon, you used to see updates of the game, and it used to go, you know, the big three, then Darlington, Hartlepool, Carlisle, York, but all of those clubs are gone. But even with that lower league clubs, it wouldn't work regionally.
I don't think so. Again, regional television doesn't really have the mechanisms now to actually do that itself. And I everything is so much more profit driven now that I don't know if there would be the audience, or I don't know if it'd be cost effective to put on League Two matches onto television, or to put National League matches onto terrestrial television. I'm not sure it'd be cost effective. And anyway, I think the actual broadcast model, in some, well, no, not in some senses, basically in every sense, is sort of is mutating and changing all the time. And we live in a world of streaming now as well. I think what you might see is, for example, you might see games streamed live on something like ITVX or something like that. But I don't think you'd ever have like, well, we're not showing Coronation Street tonight. We're showing Darlington against whoever. I think those days are gone.
Yeah, and it's just dawned on us how bad North East football is in the lower leagues. Actually, I hadn't quite realised until I said it out loud, to be honest.
It's not great at the moment. It's not a vintage time, no.
Yeah, it's not. But yeah, I mean, kind of circling back to the modern day in terms of Sunderland. I mean, it's been a while since we talked to you in the first time on our kind of fancy new look podcast. But Kirill Louis Dreyfus, he's been owner of the club for 3 years now, and it's mostly been ups. We've had a couple of bumps in the road. But since he's come in, you know, I've said it a few times in the past that, you know, that in the past it seems like Sunderland have always kind of winged it. We've always bought players that were available. And for the last few years, I've just thought we've got a plan. And you kind of, each window, I mean, I fully expect not to have heard of the players that we signed. And I'm quite happy with that, because I know what they're doing. I know what the club's doing. But, and you know, that, we had Kieran Maguire on recently as well, and he described that sort of ownership as just completely ignoring the outside noise who keep asking for big name signings and things like that. But I mean, you've seen it at close quarters. How do you make of the way they've built things up over the last few years?
I'm really impressed by it. I think it's been an example of young people owning a football club for the first time and running a football club for the first time and making mistakes as they go along. But as you correctly point out, everything being underpinned by a plan that they believe in and not deviating from that, really. And I think it's been excellent. It has been chalk and cheese, hasn't it? From basically, let's sign this guy, let's sign this guy, let's sign this guy. The scattergun way that the club was run really for generations, to now a very focused plan of the way they do their business. It's been really interesting, really excellent to watch. I do think in some respects it's ever so slightly overstated that they're a dogmatic football club who do things in a certain way. I think the difference is that Sunderland are happy to talk about it. They're happy to basically say, yes, this is what we're doing. We're just going to sign young players. We're going to build them up and sell them on. That is actually what 90% of football clubs do. It's just Sunderland are more upfront about saying it, and they a bit more stick to their own rule book than most do. But it's been really good to watch. It hasn't been without mistakes. What I kind of like and am enthused by is that they seem to learn from their mistakes. I think management appointments, head coach appointments has been the most obvious area there where I don't know if you'd call Lee Johnson at the time a mistake, but it kind of didn't work out. And there was certain things. Lee talked too much and talked in a certain way. And you needed somebody who was a bit more plain spoken to be in charge of Sunderland. And so they found their guy with Alex Neil, and they moved on, and then it went to Tony Mowbray, and that was great. And then they appointed Michael Beale, and that just didn't work at all. But they've learned from it. And whilst last season was in many ways not interesting and an absolute pain in the backside, looking back, I find it quite interesting what they did with it, because I think I'm a big fan of like NBA basketball, and what happens there a lot is teams tank the season. They just give up on the season. And I think Sunderland gave up on last season. And whilst you'd never admit that, to your fan base. I think that's what they did. And I don't think it was the worst decision, because last season's team was not going to get promoted. So they thought, well, we'll just sort of basically go into hibernation for 6 months and come back hopefully stronger. And that's what they did. And I think it's all part of this process of them learning as they go along.
Yeah. And you mentioned about talking too much. And I do wonder from...
I didn't think that, by the way. Yeah.
So, well, from a media point of view, looking at Kirill Louis-Dreyfus and the interactions with him, I mean, there's been very few interactions with him where he's come out and stated it. You could argue that as an owner, he has, and of course he has every right to put people in those positions. You know, Christian Speakman to look after the football, maybe David Bruce to come out and talk about the commercial things. But do you think, you know, when that sort of ownership seems to work well, obviously, when things are going in the right direction or not going completely wrong. But is that something that could backfire and go wrong if things go south and don't quite go right?
I suppose so. I mean, the messaging has more come from Christian Speakman, hasn't it? Sort of going out and doing once, twice a season interviews, usually with the club. And he does occasionally sit down with the press as well. Yes, the seen but not heard style of management, I suppose, can backfire. But a lot of time with football club owners, I think fans like the idea of their owners being available to them and ultra accountable and answering every question. But do you really want that? I mean, ultimately, what are you going to ask, and what do you expect them to say to a lot of questions? They are the guys at the top, and it's just sort of the way now. If you look around world football, there's very few vocal club owners these days. They let other people get on with it.
Yeah. And you can look back, you know, Charlie Methven talking about 100 points. People can say ridiculous things and get themselves into trouble, can't they?
Well, yeah, so there, exactly. Is that what you want?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, they can't win, really. They either say too much or say too little, so they can never win. But yeah, I mean, but you mentioned, obviously, Christian Speakman, that he's the face of the football side of the club. I mean, I've said this a couple of times that, you know, you will talk about kind of assets we've got on the pitch, obviously, with the players. But the progress we've made over the last few years, I see him as a huge asset. And obviously, Stuart Harvey as well, and with the recruitment team and with the scouting team. But, you know, if you're running a Premier League club or a mid-table Premier League club, or someone who's trying to make that next step, and maybe Sunderland don't miss out, I mean, if you're looking about the Football League on clubs who make, you know, scouting teams and recruitment teams who've made progress with clubs, you'd probably put Christian Speakman at the top of your list.
Wouldn't surprise me if he's on a few lists, if people are looking. I mean, he's very invested in the project at Sunderland. And I think it would take something huge and life-altering if he was to move away from it at the moment. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, I think your bottom line point there is that Stuart Harvey and that side of the club have had far more hits than misses. And if you have more hits than misses, you're doing your job pretty well in modern football.
Yeah. And about the model, although I keep saying the model, I hate saying the model, but until I think of a better word, I'll keep calling it that. You've got to look at the recent announcement, and I say announcement, but I think it's possibly just that story that it leaked from somewhere. Tommy Watson going off to Brighton, but with the way we're working, it's probably something we should get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack Clarke at the start of the season was really the first big one of that. Then Tommy Watson comes up. Let's not kid ourselves that it's not going to happen with one or two players in the summer, regardless of what division Sunderland are playing in next season. It is something that you have to learn to live with. And I do think, again, I share your slight uncomfortable with saying the model, but let's just use that phrase because it works. Well, I think the most fascinating thing about Sunderland in this era is just the basic question of, is this ultimately going to work? To explain that as briefly as I can, if we say that what they're doing is broadly, not identically, but broadly similar to what's done at, let's say, Brighton and Brentford, then that shows you that it can be successful at the Premier League level and it can be sustainable at that level. But those two football clubs don't have gorgeous, big, crazy, neurotic fan bases like Sunderland. And can a gorgeous, big, crazy, neurotic fan base like Sunderland live with the knowledge that your best players will leave, that the club isn't going to go out and spend the big money, that this is always going to be the way that the model works? I'm interested to see in another 2 years and another 3 years, and if and when, and hopefully they do get to the Premier League, can those things coexist? Can a club of the nature and the size of Sunderland coexist with the model that they've currently got in place? Or does it eventually start to rub up against each other? And I think that's going to be the most fascinating thing about the club for the next few years.
Yeah. And I think actually touching on that, some of that happened towards the end of last season. I think with the apathy that everyone was feeling as the club kind of just packed it in, and the club weren't really forthcoming. Like you said, they're not going to come out and just tell you that we're planning for next season and we've given up. But obviously, you said that Michael Beale went into Mike Dodd's looking after things. And then there was, the kind of speculation, the names. Obviously, I think it's, more rife in clubs like Sunderland where the names are banded around. Everyone's kind of talking to people who works at local hotels to see who's staying there and stuff like that. And then we appointed Regis Le Bris, in the summer, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. I mean, going back to the summer, what did you first think of that appointment? Did you think, this is just going to go one of two ways, and this could be one of those kind of disasters that, if he doesn't win his first 5 games, then the pressure's really on?
To an extent, yes, that's exactly what I thought. I know a couple of people who know a lot about French football, so I was straight on the phone to them. I'll make no bones about it. And until his name came up, I had never heard of Regis Le Bris. So I did some very, very quick research on him, or as much as I could. And yeah, had the season not started the way it had, you just don't know the way things would have gone. I think I did expect it to be someone of the profile of Regis Le Bris. I expected it to be a younger European head coach rather than a more establishment manager type. So I wasn't surprised with the nature of the appointment, but I think most of us in the local media would be telling slight gentle lies if we said that we knew a great deal about Regis Le Bris before he actually turned up.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously you said the start he had, but I mean, we'll come to the current position, but considering he's had virtually the same squad, do you think people are still slightly underestimating the job he's actually done this season?
Yes, I think he's done a great job. I think everyone at the football club's done a great job, and I don't know where it's going to lead them at the end of the season, but to be pretty definitively the 4th best team in the Championship, coming off of last season with the youngest squad in the Championship, with a head coach who had no previous experience of English football, I think they've done a fantastic job, and he's done a fantastic job.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny because I try and watch the press conferences when I can. And he seems, you go back to the especially kind of the Alex Neil press conferences, which always seem to have an edge to them for some reason. And you look at the current manager's press conferences, and you just end up kind of seemingly nodding along because he's very concise. He doesn't say anything outrageous. He doesn't give anything away. I mean, I think that's good for the Sunderland fan base that we've got a manager who's on an even keel. He's not massively up. He's not massively down. But how is that from a media point of view? Is it kind of struggling to get, that big soundbite out of him sometimes?
A little bit, but I don't really look at it like that. He's not going to be the big bravado soundbite guy, and he was never going to be. But for always remember that he's doing his press conferences in a second language, and he does phenomenally well from that point of view.
Yeah,
he occasionally doesn't get the nuance of the English language, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. He's absolutely fantastic with his English. It's a bit more of like sitting in a middle management meeting rather than a sort of celebrity football manager. But he still manages to sort of speak, I think, quite, I don't know if passionately is the right word, but as if he really believes in what he's doing and what he's talking about. And if he's really invested in what he's doing, I do think that comes across. And he does make interesting tactical points. And I kind of like it, really. It's okay. press conferences, managers, yes, some are very good at them. So some of them treat them in different ways. So some of them just don't like the whole process of press conferences. I don't think he particularly enjoys it, but he's fine. He's fine. And I think people have learned to accept him for what he is, in that he doesn't really want the spotlight. He wants to be the guy in the background who's moving the chess pieces about and making plans, but it is part of his role that he does have to go and sit in front of the cameras and the microphones.
Yeah. Do you think he's got it in his locker for that motivational speech when it's needed, especially when it comes to the players, of course?
Well, I think we've got to look at the results and say, I think that he must have. I know what you mean. Is he the man for the Churchillian speech, standing up in the dressing room and, land of hope and glory and all the French equivalent,
you hope it's not needed,
playing in the background? I don't know. He doesn't appear to be, but looks can be deceptive. And I've been told by football players all through my career, never judge a manager by what you see in public as to what they're actually like behind the door of the dressing room. So you just don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, over the course of the season, especially the second half of the season, his style of football's probably been scrutinised quite a lot. And you go back to the last time we kind of qualified for the playoffs under Tony Mowbray, and we did that. We did that in style. I mean, we did that. We different, obviously, with Ahmad in, because I think that kind of defined the way we played, the way Ahmad and especially linked up with Roberts and played the football we did. But being that different way of playing, do you think it's given some of these players, especially the younger ones in the squad, and players who've in the past been given that freedom, they've now been given that structure to maybe be a bit more effective?
Yeah, I think that's why the whole youngest team in the championship thing works, because I think young players desperately need structure to thrive. I think it's very dangerous. Even the most talented young players like Chris Rigg need structure. Otherwise, they can just get lost within their own heads and out on a football pitch and just basically not know what they're actually trying to accomplish. Yes, it is. It's very heavily structured, and I think that's the way to go with a young squad. I don't know. It's always hugely entertaining football. When it works, it is, and they've played some absolutely blinding stuff. But I think to say it's always hugely entertaining, free-flowing football isn't entirely true. It is incredibly heavily structured the way they play. But I think you've just got to admire that. And you look at the results, and again, come back to it. Fourth best team in the championship with a young squad. The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, and it's funny because you've come back to that bottom line a couple of times, talking about us being cemented in as fourth place behind those top three with parachute payments. So how strange is it to cover Sunderland at the moment? Because we're having a cracking season, but it's funny that there seems to be this these odd results popping up now, and this tension building with these games that don't really have any immediate consequence.
Yeah, well, this possibly goes back to the big, gorgeous, crazy, neurotic fan base. I think this is the nature of Sunderland. I think Sunderland fans want everything everywhere all the time, don't they? They want the club to progress. They want the club to get promoted to the Premier League. They want the squad and the players to be ready for the playoffs in 3-4 weeks' time. But they also want to turn up on a sunny Saturday afternoon on a home game against Swansea City and to be royally entertained, and to see the opposition run out of town and free-flowing attacking football. And you can't have everything all the time. And it is funny. And, I mean, we might get onto ideas of what's going to happen and what ultimately will be the resolution of this season. But I personally, whatever happens, will always judge this as a successful season for Sunderland, because I think everyone at the club has done their job extremely well. And I don't think you can ask for too much more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just moving on in these last, remaining for, I want to say 4 games, off the top of my head. I mean, how does he handle it? Because he's got this trade-off, and I think everyone's shouting it, but he's got this trade-off between resting players, which, you've almost got a section of the fan base saying, well, just rest players, just kind of don't play them until the last game or the last 2 games. And then you've got some saying, yeah, but we want to play our best team and we want to get momentum with our best team. And it seems like, with obviously the changes he's made the last couple of games, it's clearly he is rotating players out and giving players a rest. But do you think it's looking a bit confused by doing that?
I'm absolutely sure that he knows what he's doing. Let's take Le Fay as an example. Were it the playoffs, Le Fay would be starting games, but because they are in this strange little sea of tranquility, Nick Barnes called it, in fourth place, good term, well done, Barnesy. Enzo Le Fay doesn't have to start games at the moment. He is coming back from the injury, and so they're giving him half-hour stints. Whether he'll start the game at Bristol City, I don't know. I'm sure he will start to play longer in games as they get up towards the playoffs. But it's a very difficult needle to thread. And if we think about it, there was the lousy performance at Coventry, which is one of very few lousy performances this season. Then they came back from the international break, and it hasn't been an awful lot of fun, but it's been good, solid, professional stuff. He's done a bit of rotation, and it had all been kind of fine up until yesterday. And yesterday was the one where it did kind of feel a little bit like everybody was marking time yesterday, and there was not a great deal of urgency around the game. And I think that proves what an almost unique situation they find themselves in, and what a very difficult needle it is to thread, because you do want to rest your better players. Like I'm all for Jobe Bellingham having sat for a couple of games, because he played almost every minute of every game before that, apart from the ones he was suspended for. And yet you get a performance like that, and you can't expect anybody to be particularly happy about it. It's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, Freudian slip there with the Bellingham brothers.
Yeah, sorry.
They're as good as each other, of course, aren't they?
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and you talked about that press conference. I thought the manager hinted a little bit when he talked about the Norwich and West Brom games, that it was almost like he focused purely on the defensive shape, because you looked at the Norwich game. I thought we were deeper there than I've seen us in a lot of games this season. We just kind of had our defensive positions and almost kind of dug our trench at Norwich. And it seemed like he was saying, well, this is almost preparation for the away leg in the playoffs. But, but then you've got the Swansea game where you think, well, okay, well, this is our chance to say, let's see how we do in the final third and get a couple of goals and things like that. But are we looking too much into the games during this run-in?
Interesting point about the away games, and if indeed that has been how he's used recent away games, then good for him. I think that's very good. But equally, your point's completely valid, because, I mean, attacking wise, Sunderland were just a complete non-entity yesterday. They were a mess, and there doesn't appear to be any kind of through line to what they want to look like in the playoffs at that end of the pitch at the moment. And that's a little bit frustrating. Obviously, the Mundle injury has come at a bad time. It just goes back to this situation. It's really strange, this fourth place. And, it's like if you've ever driven to Las Vegas and you look either side of you and there's like nothing there for like an hour and a half. That's the situation that Sunderland find themselves in. It's very, very strange. And I don't know. I mean, they'll get to the playoffs and hopefully it'll all slot into place. But I share your concerns on one respect, that momentum is a sort of seductive image and a seductive thing, but I don't know if it's possible for them to actually build too much of it going into the playoffs, because they are just in this strange position where I don't think anybody will be risked if they're not 100% fit. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it might get to the last two games and he might try and put what he thinks is his first 11 out to actually give them some run time together. But that's what I'd do anyway. But I don't know. It's just odd.
Yeah. And by the way, just like Barnsley's Sea of Tranquility, I'm nicking your Vegas metaphor, and I will reference you every time I use it, by the way. But that's a brilliant metaphor for our current situation. But looking at some of the reaction to the game, though, and I don't know how fair you think it is, but a lot was pointing to the fact that it seemed that players weren't necessarily going in for those 50-50 tackles as if, we were fighting for a position, or it was a kind of a standard league game where you're desperate for those 3 points. And there was a lot of passing it around the back, which, yes, okay, that's generally how we start, but there didn't seem to be any intent from the side to really go for it. Would that be fair?
Yes, it would be fair. It just wasn't very good, was it? Nothing seemed to work. There wasn't urgency. There was one or two players, one in particular, who, yes, I thought the exact same thing, did not appear to want to put themselves in any particular physical harm. I'm not going to mention any names there, but the whole thing, the sunny day, everything, we were saying in the press box, this feels like a football match at the start of May. It felt like a meaningless end of season game. And sometimes performances like that happen where this whole thing of marking time, yesterday was the first one where it just really felt like this doesn't matter. This, we are fulfilling an obligation by being here. And that is how it felt yesterday. And it wasn't hugely comfortable. It certainly wasn't entertaining. And, there's a couple of home games left and it needs to be better than that. I think ultimately the season's been so good and they are going to the playoffs and that is going to be hugely exciting. I think you can forgive them 1-2 like this, but I do think after yesterday, they need to, and I expect them to turn up at Bristol City on Good Friday and just be a lot better.
Yeah. And how much does it tell us, though, about where the players' heads are at in terms of like just looking at that playoffs? And they almost seem to be going, well, I can almost down tools for a little bit and wait for that first leg.
Yeah, it does seem like that. And that's a bit dangerous, isn't it? I think this is where the squad needs careful man managing, and possibly where the youth of the squad could be an issue because they could just see it in very, very plain terms of we don't need to worry about this game. We only need to worry about the games in 3 weeks' time. But there has to be a way of managing that process whereby saying, well, you might sit for this game or we might try a slightly different way in that game, but to not try at all. And I'm not saying they didn't try, but to feel that you don't necessarily need to lace your boots up as tight for these games, that's a bit dangerous. And I think possibly the almost the psychological side of it needs careful management over the next few weeks to keep them in the right headspace as well as the right physical condition.
Yeah. And we'll be playing teams as well, the likes of Bristol City and Blackburn, straight off the bat, who've still got a little bit potentially to play for, especially Bristol City. But yeah, I mean, looking at the playoffs, could be interesting. Of course, I've already mentioned Millwall, potentially Alex Neil sniffing around doing his thing again. You've obviously got the Tony Mowbray thing with West Brom. You've got Coventry, who are just Coventry. You've got whoever drops out of the top three. So you've got probably, Sheffield United. It's losing the last 3 games. And I think I was trying to count, Simon. Is it the 5th one you'll have covered with Sunderland?
Playoffs? Oh, I haven't counted them. I've done loads. Well, I've done them all. I wasn't doing it on the Gary Bennett Gillingham days back way back when. I'm not that old, but I've done everyone since. So count them all. But there's no need to be afraid, is there? Because, the last time Sunderland were in Football League playoffs, it went rather well. So that particular weight is off the shoulders. Interested to see. I do think it's started to shake out a bit now. And I think the current top 2 will end up being the top 2. And I don't know about 5-6. Bristol City are a complete mystery to me. I was at the Bristol City game at the Stadium of Light, which was not one of Sunderland's better performances, as I'm sure you remember. There was that late equaliser from Patrick Roberts. But they are a complete and utter mystery to me. I don't really know who they are, why they're there, or what they do. Coventry are a bit less of a mystery because, they're not massively dissimilar to how they were a couple of years ago when they played Borough in the playoffs, and I covered that obviously for Tyne Tees. They're different, obviously, but there's still quite a lot of the players there. They're, if you're a Sunderland fan, you probably don't want to play Coventry over 2 legs just because it doesn't feel like a particularly good football matchup this season. And historically, obviously, they'll find a way to kick the game off 15 minutes late just to wind people up. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I can't tell you what's going to happen with those 5-6 positions, but I'm starting to doubt Middlesbrough will get in there. But we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. But again, just go back to that situation. How weird is it that Sunderland are just, sat waiting to find out who's going to be fifth, to find out where they're going on Friday, May the 9th.
Yeah.
And whose name to put on the programme for the return leg on the 13th. It's just really weird.
Yeah. Yeah. And from your point of view, I suppose, that possibility of playing Middlesbrough, I mean, it would be I'm fairly certain, 99% sure off the top of my head. Any of the top three haven't met in playoffs since 1990, when obviously Sunderland played Newcastle. So it would be huge if the two met in the playoffs, either in the semis or the final.
Oh my God! I mean, it would be massive. A penny for the thoughts of the Northumbria and Cleveland police forces. Certainly, that would be a thing. I mean, imagine if it was the final. Just imagine.
Wembley win.
I don't know how you do it. I really don't. You'd have to get the fans to travel on different train lines. It would be an incredibly complicated, difficult, and hugely emotional situation. Two other points on that. I think that's not a bad matchup for Sunderland were it to come up in a playoff semi-final. And the final point is I don't think it will. I've just got a feeling. I don't really. I like Middlesbrough when they're good, but I don't trust them to be good enough. So I'm not 100% sure they're going to get in the top six.
Yeah. Well, I've just, Millwall winning the last three. I've just got the Alex Neil fear at the minute, but there you go. But again, I mean, we haven't talked much about too many of the players, but just looking, we're talking about the playoffs and we're talking about the lottery of the playoffs. Players have been linked away. Chris Riggs getting heavily linked away. I think it was Tottenham the last time. It's probably someone else now. Joe Bellingham was Manchester United. And I think there's teams looking at him from abroad. Dan Neil should be looked at by lots of Premier League teams because he's a Premier League player. Give him more time on the ball, I think, in the Premier League, and he's an even better player. But so how important is it for Sunderland that we do go up? Because we've said it for the last couple of years, but this could be a big one where we do see a lot of departures.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge, isn't it? Obviously, it would change so much for the club if they could go up. And I think the team's going to look quite different next season, regardless of what division they're in. But you are right. And it's kind of the unspoken thing that I think all fans probably realise, but don't really like to talk about it. If this season doesn't end the way that Sunderland want them to, then, I mean, worst case scenario, you could be looking at half the established starting lineup probably not being at the club next season. If they can get promoted, then there's one in particular that I would still expect to leave regardless. But probably they for example, they might be able to hold on to Chris Rigg for another year if they were promoted. If not, then I think that's probably unlikely. It does feel almost a little bit unfair that, as I've said, I genuinely believe Sunderland are having and have had a really successful and uplifting season, and yet the sort of price of not succeeding at the end of it could be a very high price to pay.
Yeah, and you said Sunderland shouldn't fear anyone, but with the stuttering form we've had and the way that we're kind of limping maybe through this run-in or kind of keeping players fit or however we're going to deal with it, how confident are you that Sunderland can actually perform in the playoffs, or is it just too much of a lottery?
It's a bit of a lottery. The thing that concerns me at the moment is scoring. They don't score enough all season. Most of the time, even when they win games, they're hanging on in the last minute. That's just been the way it's kind of worked out and the way the team has evolved. But at the moment, it is the firepower that's the question for me with the playoffs. I think it's going to be a bit different to the last one. I mean, obviously, we remember Tony Mowbray with the sumptuous attacking football, but there was that weird injury situation where they basically ran out of any defenders. And so whilst you were always reasonably confident they might do something at one end, you were afraid that they just wouldn't have anybody to stop people scoring at the other. And it feels a bit the reverse this time. I can see it being two attritional playoff semi-finals and Sunderland not giving away very much, but can they actually do enough damage in an attacking sense to find their way through a two-legged tie? That's where I think I've got question marks just at the minute. I think they've got talented attacking players, but they haven't really been a free-flowing attacking team all season, and it seems to have gummed up a bit in the last couple of months.
Yeah. Well, speaking of attacking players, you mentioned Mundle and his injury earlier on. And I think the last comment made on it was he should be okay for the playoffs. And unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember Colin Pascoe being touch and go for the 1990 playoffs, where we had to end up having to do different things on the left-hand side. And I think he came back half fit for the final, I think, if I remember rightly. I mean, how big a blow could that be? And do you think it's one of them where it's going to be one of those injuries that, especially from a press point of view and fans wanting to know, that the question's going to keep getting asked every week? How's Mundle doing? Is he getting back? Is he going to be on the bench? Do you think it's going to be one of them leading up to it?
Yeah, I do. I think that's inevitable now. I think he is a very important player for the team. I think he's part of the first 11, and I think he would play in the playoffs if he was fit. The problem now is he could be back around the time of the playoffs. Doesn't mean he's going to be fit to start games in the playoffs, does it? Yeah. So that is a very big blow for Sunderland. Obviously, there's things that they can do on the left, including Tommy Watson. But, let's just come out and say it. Tommy Watson didn't have a very good game yesterday. There are questions about where his head is at. I would use him because he's a resource. So just, on that point, I would 100% use him. He didn't have a good game yesterday. Losing Mundle would be a blow. But there's been a few things. I mean, there's all injuries are blows, but I thought one of the more costly ones recently was Le Fay's injury, because him not playing for those 4 or 5 games took away the opportunity to try him in the middle, which is obviously, I think, where people ultimately see him playing. And they haven't really had the runtime with that. I'm sure they probably will over the next couple of games. Going back to our earlier conversation, he'll start to play more. Whether he starts at Bristol City or not, I don't know. But he'll start a game before too long, and they probably will start him in the middle. But I think that was a difficult one, and I would put that in terms of a blow. I would put that up there with the Mundle one, Le Fay's little injury that took him out of the situation for about a month. But yeah, I mean, Mundle's a worry. Ideally, you'd like him fit and available and 100%. I don't think that's now going to be the case. So, you move past it.
Yeah, you're right about Le Fay, because that was a huge one, because in January, the club almost put all their eggs in one basket by bringing him in to push for the top 2.
Yeah, and if you want to be dogmatic about it and try and find some crumb of comfort about the Swansea debacle yesterday, it was Le Fay. It was Le Fay coming on and looking bright and breezy, and his wonderful footwork. He was mostly operating down the side of the pitch where, the side the press area is, and you look at his close control and it's absolutely wonderful. And that was the plus point yesterday. And yeah, and he's going to play, isn't he? Whether they go back to the sort of slightly wedge him in on the left and just kind of let him do what he wants structure if Mundle's not fit. However they manage to get him in the team, they will get him in the team.
Yeah. Just specifically on the playoffs, and we talked about the style of play, and we touched on those playoffs in 1998 a little bit earlier on, but I've said this recently, that I think the best atmosphere I've ever been involved in at any sporting event, and I've been to plenty, not just Sunderland, but was Sheffield United home leg in the playoffs, in the fog, night game. But when you think back, you could just say it was a different time, but there was obviously a connection between the fans and the club at the time, which there kind of is now. But do you think that's almost something as well that comes from the style of play? That, that side back in the day where, you knew they were going to go for it. You knew it was going to be attacking because we needed goals, getting beaten that first leg. But, I feel a bit sad saying this, but I don't expect that sort of atmosphere in the home leg. And I don't know whether I'm just being down on it a little bit, because obviously with the Swansea game, it was disappointing, but I'm struggling to see it get to anywhere near those sort of levels.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Welcome to modern football. This is the way the game is now. It is hugely structured. It is play out from the back. It is pressing with 6 men from goal kicks. It is a game of chess more than it's the sort of free-flowing old school wingers with their socks rolled down game that a lot of us grew up with. And yeah, it's a really interesting point you make about the sort of emotional and physical link with the crowd. it probably has changed a bit. And I said earlier, didn't I? I don't necessarily think Sunderland's style of play is always that entertaining. It can be structured to the point of there only being the structure sometimes, and that occasionally, in terms to a crowd, could maybe seem a little bloodless. But I think the situation will take care of the atmosphere, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Because everybody knows the importance of it. Everybody wants to go to Wembley. I would hope that will take care of itself. I was actually covering the game you were talking about, the Sheffield United's playoff, and I kind of agree. It was one of the loudest atmospheres I can ever. It was one where the stadium was very new at the time, but you could almost feel it shake, and it actually hurt your ears at times. It was so incredibly loud. Maybe we're just in a different era for football atmospheres as well. Just because the game's moved on, maybe the atmosphere in the ground has moved on as well, and maybe we don't quite get atmospheres like that anymore, which is kind of sad if that is the case. But I mean, bottom line, I just want it to go well. I want them to thrill the crowd. I want them to get to Wembley. I want them to get promoted, because I think they've had a fantastic season, and I hope they can harness the power of the crowd. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I mentioned Wembley a few times there. So, are you all planned? Ready to go, or have you made those arrangements? Do you plan that far ahead?
Not on this one. No. I don't think you tend to. For that, it's. I mean, look. Obviously, I'm regional, so I've just been there covering Newcastle. We booked the hotels and the trains for that after the first leg of their semi-final. That's the way we'll play it. Basically, if Sunderland go and win their first leg of the semi-final 3-0 and they've got the home leg to come, then we'll be booking the Travelodge, King's Cross, and checking the train times. That's kind of tends to be the way you do it. Bring it on. I love trips to Wembley. I'm definitely going once more this year anyway for Spennymoor Town. So it'd be amazing. It'd be amazing if they get there.
Yeah. Well, we've got all this fun to come, which is probably a good place to leave things for today. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Simon. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully catch up soon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I have enjoyed this far more than I enjoyed the game of association football I watched at the Stadium of Light yesterday.
Well, I was going to say, maybe we could maybe arrange something for around the playoffs, maybe a live edition from Covent Garden or something like that.
Absolutely.
I'm still, pinning my hopes on the fact that we're going to be there. But cheers, Simon, appreciate it. And thanks again for everyone for listening. We're already planning the pods in the week ahead, so you will need to like or subscribe or whatever it is you need to do, because I've been told it does make a difference, although I'm yet to find out what that is. But please do it regardless, because don't listen to my lack of knowledge. And also look out on the Roker Report site for all the latest from our brilliant writers. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.